I don't know about you, but this is what's been true for me, is that I take those failings, those losses, those sadnesses, even those grave mistakes or whatever it is, and I hand them to Christ, right? And he takes them and he says, thank you so much. And he takes them away, but then he gives it back. And he hands it back to me in the form of a weapon that the darkness can't overcome. And so I just find that that is the case. Like all of these sadnesses and losses and hurts in God's hand will never go to waste. And he will do things through you because of the pain, in spite of the pain, that Satan will just claw his eyes out over because he cannot overcome it.
Thanks for joining us on It Matters with Esther and Elizabeth. I'm Esther.
And I'm Elizabeth.
And on this podcast, we like to look at difficult topics and say, what does the Bible have to say about them?
If you're tuning in for the first time, our focus of season 4 has been on relationships and reconciliation. God really placed it on our hearts to talk through everything related to this, as our relationship with God and with each other is essential to being human. So if you haven't already, please go check out our most recent episodes on this issue. We've covered issues like reconciling anger, doubt, church hurt, and a whole lot more.
And today we're going to pivot and focus now on our next series, which is a huge issue where sound doctrine and healthy reconciliation are needed. And that is within the family of origin. By that, if you're unfamiliar with that term, we simply mean your parents, siblings, and the family into which you were born. We're going to have several episodes on this segment, so keep your ears open for the ones that sound most burdensome or unresolved for you. For family of origin, we're interested in what does the Bible say for each role within the family, for the overall tone and atmosphere in the home. And in order to do justice to this subject, we first want to talk about God's design for families, especially now that the concept of family has become so relative. Family can mean whatever you want it to mean. It can mean one parent, two parents, biological parents, adoptive parents, surrogacy. But before we talk about God's design for this, we want to clarify our priority is always to discuss first the biblical model of things. But we know that humans fall short and things get messy. So if you do not fall into this particular construct, there's hope for you. If you were born into a single parent home, please do not despair. We're not attacking those kind of circumstances. We know that the grace of the Lord is able to go beyond fully to supply and equip and pour out whatever it is you need. But the fact is, in society, truth about the things that God has established are forever being attacked and torn down and deconstructed. And we always want to come back and just say, okay, what's his original vision and why? And there is no better way to do that than to rather look at the fruit of what happens when humans go their own way. So with no further ado, Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yes, with that view in mind, I'm so excited that Katy Faust is here joining us. I read Katy Faust's book called Them Before Us a year ago. It rocked my world. She's also the founder and director of a global organization also called Them Before Us. Katy is a children's rights advocate and believes that children have natural rights that all adults should both honor and advocate for. Katy, we're so excited that you're here with us.
The honor is mine. This is going to be great. I love what you guys are doing. I love the perspective that you're sharing. I love that you're tackling all of these hard issues because honestly, I don't have any time for Christians that don't know exactly why God said what he said and did what he did and designed what he designed. And when we don't get it right, honestly, children are the victims. And if there's one group of people that should not be making child victims, it is Christians.
Come on.
Amen. Love it. Coming in fire with that intro. Thank you. So we're going to get into
We're all busy moms. We've got dinner. I mean, we got to get this time.
We got to get it. We got to do it. So before we get into all of our million questions that we have for you, tell us your story for listeners who don't know who you are. What has led you to where you are now? Where are you from? What's going on? Tell us all the stuff.
Yes, I live in Seattle. As my little running joke goes, like I'm one of the last 9 Christians in Seattle.
Thank God for you.
Have left. My husband's a pastor here, so I love the family of God. I love the church. I believe in the church. Yes. I believe in equipping my kids to stand against a poisonous culture. And I believe that every parent can do that if you are intentional. And I believe that Christians should be transformers of culture, not transformed by culture. And you can do that everywhere. So that was kind of what I was all about 10 years ago, was just being a wife, a mom, pastor's wife, loved it. And now I'm an activist that like goes around the world speaking with people and doing conferences and things like that, simply because when I saw the marriage debate playing out, like especially in my state, it started in like 2012, things really got going in Washington state. And then of course, nationally, it was this big debate in 2015 when the Supreme Court took up the case. But what I saw was this absolute forsaking of children in that conversation, that it was obsessively focused on the adults and what the adults wanted. And actually on both sides of the issue, the left saying, well, this is about gay adults. This is about people who, want to have a family and they've had all of this personal suffering. And so we need gay marriage for them. And honestly, on the right, I heard a lot of, oh, but if this happens, we'll have to bake a cake and make flower arrangements and that will make us uncomfortable. And like both sides, it was just adult, adult, adult. When the reality is, when you redefine marriage, when you make husbands and wives optional in marriage, mothers and fathers become legally optional in parenthood. And that is a problem because children have a natural right to their mother and father, and they long for their mother and father. And anybody that's out there listening right now, there's a really good chance that if you didn't have your mom or dad in your life, even if you're 30, even if you're 40, it's still probably one of the most painful things that you've ever experienced. And sometimes that happens due to tragedy and we mourn. But these days, and it was a catalyst, one of the catalysts for that was gay marriage. These days, we are now incentivizing, promoting, normalizing, and incentivizing motherless and fatherless homes. And it's an injustice. So I got into this mainly because I didn't see anybody specifically advocating for the children when conversations about marriage came up. And then I realized that every other conversation about marriage and family, whether it's divorce or cohabitation or polygamy or sperm and egg donation or surrogacy and even adoption, all of those conversations really just talked about adults and what they wanted. And the kids were in the sidecar along for the ride, wherever the adult wanted to go. So that was enough for me to feel like I'm ready to lose friends over this, which is not where I normally am. I like to keep my friends. I'm not confrontational in real life. But when you're victimizing the most vulnerable, it's enough for me to say,
enough's enough.
I need to do more than this. So we started the nonprofit in 2018, and we have so much more influence than we deserve. I'm so grateful to have opportunities to share this message with policymakers and people with platforms like you, because we've got to get this right. We've got to get this right.
Yeah,
specifically for you though, for someone that maybe is unfamiliar with your background, why does this hit your bleeding heart so much with your background? And how did you grow up?
Yeah. Okay. A couple things. So first of all, I've been involved in youth ministry forever, and I've never seen a kid that lost their mom and dad that didn't care, mom or dad. That, like I said, it was one of the most painful things that they experienced. So this whole narrative from the other side that kids don't need moms and dads I was like, really? Have you met a kid? No. The other thing was this framing of people that oppose gay marriage as bigots. Right. That really chapped my head because my mom has been in a relationship with her partner since I was 10. So I did not grow up with two moms. The internet will not tell you the truth about that. But I don't consider her partner to be my mom. I do consider her partner to be my friend. And I've always been close to both my mom and my dad before and after their divorce when I was 10. But I've always been good friends and lived at peace with my mom's partner and split time in their home and then the time of my father's home after their divorce. So this idea that hatred, phobia, or animus animated somebody's support for natural marriage is garbage. And absolutely none of you guys should ever be cowed into silence because of those horrible, vile, slanderous accusations. It's not true for me. It's not true for any of you either. You all love your gay family and friends, right?
Yeah.
And there's no conflict between loving them and standing for natural marriage and against all of these other cultural, technological, and legal changes that threaten the rights of children. If you're a Christian, you have to do both. You have to defend kids, and you have to be the most sacrificial and loving people in the life of your LGBT family and friends.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, obviously, your background informs a lot of your passion. You experience that, right? You experience the pain of divorce. You experience that kind of separation between mother and father and what that did. You've seen it happen in other people. This is a huge controversial issue in our nation, though. And I understand that for a while, as this was bubbling up in you, you kind of kept it under wraps. You were talking about it anonymously. I guess I'm curious to hear, what was that experience like where you finally came out about these beliefs? Kind of how has your life changed for better or worse since you started being honest with the world about this? Because I think that's a lot of our fear is like, if we come out and say it, what's going to happen?
Well, I will say this, God was very kind to allow me to do this for a couple of years anonymously, blog anonymously, because it refined me. I realized the areas where I needed to think more deeply or do more research or get better answers. There's really nothing like constant friction with a world that disagrees with you to sharpen and challenge you and make you better, right? Which is honestly why every Christian today should be full on diving into the word and apologetics, because you have to find these answers to honest questions that people have. So I had a chance to do that for a couple of years with some anonymity. I did not come out because I'm a chicken. I would have done that forever, but I was outed by a gay blogger with a huge following and platform. And he found an IP address that I was using connected to my husband's church, and then doxed members of my church, people that didn't even know that I wrote about this, to silence me. Like he, in essence, was like, I'm going to hurt the people you love if you don't shut up.
Talk about bullying. Wow. How hypocritical.
See, I knew you were outed, but I didn't know those details. That's startling.
Yeah. Yeah. So the funny thing is, it's such a what the enemy means for evil kind of story, because I'm like, well, I'm not anonymous anymore. So now I will write amicus briefs for the Supreme Court. And now I will go run workshops at the United Nations. And now I will go meet with the president of Albania and address their National Family Congress. So, like what I could do now that I didn't have the fear of having my anonymity removed actually allowed for me to create this platform and to have all of these really incredible connections.
Wow. What was that experience like? I'm so curious. So in the middle of all of this, your mother and her partner, because you have a loving relationship with them, what was that experience like in terms of your faith journey, in terms of your relationship with Christ? And then when this kind of went public, how did you preserve and keep your love towards them open, even though you were being honest to shred the lies?
Yeah, there's never any deception. This was not an issue of me having private opinions that I wasn't sharing with my family.
Okay.
I don't make this a major issue. I major on the majors, right? If I'm going to talk with my unbelieving family members, it's about Christ.
Yes.
But if they're going to ask me questions about what I think about anything else, you'd better be ready to have an answer. It better be a compelling answer. It has to be one hopefully built on the foundation of years and years of grace and love. And so they can walk away from that going, I don't agree with her, but dang, she loves me.
Yes.
Okay, like that should be the response every single time.
Yes.
And on the other side of it, they should say, and girls making them good points, right? so that's where we are. And my message was never, oh, LGBT adults or LGBT people don't have the same value, worth, and dignity. My message is, my mother cannot be replaced by two men. Hello. My father cannot be replaced by two women. Like this whole narrative about gay marriage, in essence, just says that moms and dads can be swapped in and out with no consequence to the child. That is probably the most untrue statement about my mother ever. I would never be who I am without her. She is the most incredible mom. Most of the things I do well as a mother, I do because that's how she mothered me. Wow. I could never be the woman. So she has this incredible ability to see all sides of an argument and love people no matter what the conflict is. Wow. And I'll tell you what, thank God that I got just a shred of that. Likewise, in this job that I have, I'll walk into rooms, conferences with people, like honestly, conferences with like men and women that I fangirl over on Twitter. And then I'm in the same room with them. And, you know, I'm going to be like, oh, I belong here, kind of.
That's good.
Or like going into a place to meet with members of parliament somewhere and like confidently extending my hand in a room full of men. And I can do that because I was adored by my father. And there is a level of confidence that only a father can bestow on his daughter when it comes to moving in the world of men.
Yes.
So both of my parents, even if we may not agree on everything policy-wise, they both understood that they were absolutely irreplaceable in my life. And that I needed both of them. My father passed away about 6 years ago, but I needed him until the day he died. And I still need my mother. She still mothers me. I mean, like, honestly, ladies out there, when your mother comes to visit, I mean, I pray that you have a good relationship with her, but she still mothers you, doesn't she? Yeah. She's still like putting the dishes away when you, have something else to do. Like, this relationship is it's the last thing from swappable and replaceable that we really have in the lexicon of human relationships. Wow. There is really nothing optional about mother or father in the life of a child. And even I would say in the life of an adult child. There's not ever, I don't want to say there hasn't ever been tension. We talk and we disagree, but there's never been any kind of idea that it interfered with the love and relationship that we have. So I don't really think Christians should hide. I don't think that we should be aggressors in the culture war, but you better plant your feet firm and don't let anybody move you. Don't you let anybody move you. Okay. Stand firm on the truth of Christ, especially in the areas where God's truth is crashing against the cultural shores. That's going to be the hardest place to stand, but you need to do it. Yeah. Because if you don't, you will betray your Lord or you will betray the most vulnerable. Wow. Then let people come and ask you, okay? And fear not. I mean, I say fear not, but I tremble. I still get really, really nervous about those conversations with family and friends. Yeah. But don't you move. Don't you move. So, you can absolutely do this with love and joy. And sometimes the relationship ends, but it needs to be because they're leaving, not because you're leaving.
Yes. Good. So you said a lot just there. And I think what I really heard and what I agree with is that it's plain to see that children are impacted by their mother and father, right? I have a great relationship with both of my parents. They're still married. That's a huge gift to me. And as I've gotten older, I see that difference in my confidence in certain things in me that friends of mine don't have because their dad left, or we know that this is true, right? Even if separate the Christian faith, like separate the Bible. If you don't believe those things, that's fine. But like, we know that this is an issue and that this impacts people. So from your perspective, like, how did we get here? How did we get to the point where just acknowledging psychological realities is offensive and violent? Like, and maybe there's not an easy answer to that, but that's what I kept thinking of is like, how did we get to the point of denying this?
Yeah. So where we were, if you want to talk like biblically, right, we were at this place where the reality of biological difference between male and female was totally acknowledged, where the union of these two people coming together was encouraged for life. There were some exceptions for divorce, but they were minimal. And we had this expectation, right, that kids were going to be growing up in at least that nexus, right, of mother, father, lifelong, and then hopefully with rings of extended family going out from that. So that is the ideal for children. Sociologically, it's absolutely undeniable. Do not believe the studies that say that there's no difference, right, between kids raised by two moms or two dads. There is 100% difference when you look at well-done studies, and we cover this extensively in chapter 6 of our book. But it is irrefutable and undeniable. And we actually have agreement with sociologists on the left and the right that say that the best chance of child thriving is in the home of their married biological mother and father. What we see when we just study the science is any two will not do. This is not the kind of thing where kids just need to be quote unquote safe and loved and that any adult can step in and do that. What we know is that children are most likely to be safe and loved when they are raised by their married biological mother and father. And every other arrangement does not doom children by any means, but will start to tick up the level of abuse, neglect, and risk to kids and diminished outcomes. So this is, and I am not the person to, you don't have, if you don't agree with this, your qualm is not with me, your qualm is with biology, right? Whether you look at this from an evolutionary perspective, that there is some kind of benefit to investing in your own genetic offspring, or whether you look at this from a biblical perspective where you just straight up sin against kids more often that are not related to you. That is an it's irrefutable. It's fact that but biological parents are more connected to, invested in, and protective of their own kids. So I do this little thought experiment with people, because the going narrative in culture is, well, if the adults are happy, the kids will be happy, right? Or kids just need to be safe and loved. And as long as they have two parents in the home, that's all that they need. So then my challenge is, I just, if that's the case, then mom with her live-in boyfriend, it should be no different to a child, right? Because the adults are happy. There's two adults there. You even have a man and a woman. So, hey, should be no problem, right? So you can just pause this podcast right now, people. Just pause it. And I want you to Google the words mother's boyfriend. Okay? Mother's boyfriend. Pause it. Come back. Let us know what you hear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so you're back.
Yeah.
So you're back, right? And what you saw as you scrolled through a couple pages is hundreds of thousands of reports of the most horrific child abuse, neglect, and filicide, right? Child homicide that you're going to find. Because actually, when there is an unrelated adult in the home, risk of abuse, neglect, and death skyrocket, especially if it's an unrelated man caring for a child alone. The most dangerous place a child can find themselves in this country is in the home of a man who is not their father.
Yeah.
I should say an unrelated man completely. So we have got to destroy this narrative that any two will do, that if the adults are happy, the kids will be happy. Thank God most boyfriends are not abusive, but when there is a situation of child abuse or death and there's a boyfriend in the picture, guess who the police start to look at first. So we have to, so how did we get from this place, right, of kind of intact child security to this place now where we've got custom ordered babies being designed and shipped to same-sex couples, heterosexual couples, single men, single women, shipped across the world, to this place where people break up their marriages so quickly or oftentimes opt to shack up instead of getting married altogether. And that's incredibly unstable for kids. How did we get here? And the summary is culture changed, law changed, and technology changed, right? So our culture changed to be very me-centric and really to elevate what Helen Alvarez calls sexual expressionism, right? The elevation of my sexual expression is the most valuable, important thing. And Christians would say sex has become God, right?
Yes.
Next, laws have changed, right? We had massive changes in marriage law, beginning with no-fault divorce, right? That was the first time we redefined marriage from saying that this is a permanent union to saying, no, it'll be permanent until you're unhappy and then you can get out of it. So marriage is now just this vehicle of adult fulfillment rather than this critical institution for child well-being. And then, of course, that carried over to completely making mothers or fathers optional in gay marriage. And then technology changed. We learned how to make babies outside of the confines of a mother's womb and inside a petri dish. And now we've got all kinds of assembling of sperm, egg, and womb, graded, shopped for, designed, disposed of, until you reach the product that you desire. And that child can go home with both or none of their biological parents. And there's nobody there to do any background checks or vetting. So there's been a lot of changes in a lot of different areas. But the bottom line is children are now being commodified. We now see them as objects of right, something that is owed to somebody else rather than subjects of rights, people to which we owe responsibility and protection. So, we're in a brave new world, people.
This is all so overwhelming, and I think both our wheels are just spinning like crazy. I'm so fascinated with some of the things that you've talked about in terms of the importance of both of the roles, not just for, like you said, a loved and safe safety kind of a environment for children, but going back to how you described in the Bible, the specific model of the family, what would you say, and you're very passionate about the role of a father and the effect that he has on his child and the role of a mother and the effect that she has on her children. what would you say? Why is that the case? Just, and I feel like you have so much to share about this. I would love to hear why is the father so important? Why is the mother so important in that specificity?
Yeah, it does not have to do with like who's baking cookies and who's working on the car,
Yeah.
right? This absolutely has to do with his maleness and her femaleness. I mean, you can look at almost every aspect of men and women and how distinct they are from one another. And then those are just amplified. And I would actually say the venue where those differences matter most is in the home. So things like, women have wider hips and softer skin, and babies prefer it. Babies prefer their mother's touch, right? They have softer skin. Dads obviously are statistically larger physically. They're able to do more rough and tumble play. And developmentally, that is not optional for kids, especially for boys. Boys learn massive amounts of self-restraint, self-control, and channeling of their natural aggressive and competitive tendencies while wrestling with dad, right? A boy that has a dad that's wrestling with him or throwing him in the pool.
This is my 3-year-old's number one request at night. By the way, Daddy, wrestle me every time he comes home. It's so sweet.
It feeds them. It feeds them, right? It's not an option. It actually is a developmental need for them. And boys that don't have a dad in the home to teach them the limits of their physicality and aggression very often will have their first lesson with police or with some other law enforcement unit, right? Which is why you almost have predictable patterns of fatherless boys having increased rates of criminality. So when it comes to girls, what we see is the presence of her father actually changes her biochemistry in some ways. So girls that don't grow up with their father in the home actually start their period a year earlier than girls that don't, right? Why is that?
Wild.
It's because physiologically, she actually is made to be loved by a man. And if her father is not in the home to do it, she will find a man to love her.
It's like she can't stay a child. It's almost like that's taken away. Wow.
Well, and we're not like there's no disagreement that girls start their periods early. There is disagreement about why. Some of them think that, from a evolutionary perspective, that it means her body is signaling, there's an absence of men in the world. I need to go populate the world. So it prepares her to reproduce sooner. Some speculate that it is the foreign pheromones of unrelated men, perhaps mother's boyfriend, or the presence of a stepfather, that her body knows that it's not the man that gave birth to her. And maybe she needs to be prepared to, engage sexually with him. And so, but their bodies, right? It is all about our bodies and the differences between men and women. Here's another just illustration. There's so many ways women talk to their kids differently, right? We tend to say to our 3-year-old, "Oh, honey, do you have a boo-boo? Oh, come here." And the dad says, "Dude, gnarly rug burn. Where'd you get that? I mean, whatever we got to do that, we got to do that again, bigger, stronger, harder, right?" Like we simplify our language. So the kids always have a parent that they completely understand, but dads are always, they talk to their kids the way they talk to everyone else. They're always stretching their child's vocabulary, having them reach just a little farther, right? We play with kids differently. Moms tend to emphasize fine motor skills, right? Cutting, chopping, tying shoes, everything you do with your fingers, right? Those tend to be mom activities. Dads emphasize gross motor skills, running, jumping, climbing, digging. And I'll tell you what, like kids need both of that fine form of development, right? To maximize their growth. So, I mean, even things like the way they read together, kids that have dads that read to them specifically have larger vocabularies and greater cognition. And it's not because dads choose different books. It's because mom reads the book like, "Oh, how many pigs do you see in this picture? 1, 2, 3." And the dad's like, "I want to know where the pig got the bricks. Where did you see a brick factory? There were no bricks. Where did he get it? Do you think that he ambushed a brick truck?" I mean, they read stories differently than women do. And so the thing is that it's not because they're trying to fill a male or female role. It's because their bodies are different and their brains are different. And it pushes them to interact with kids in different ways. And it just so happens that those two ways are different and complementary. And kids get all of their needs met when they have the male and female parent in their life every day.
That's so great.
Yeah, I am you're saying a lot of things. And as you're talking, I'm like infuriated because it's like, I know everything that you're saying is true, but we're living in a world that's suppressing that truth, which kind of brings me to my next question. The person that I both love and hate to talk about, Glennon Doyle. She has a popular podcast, as I'm sure you're familiar, called We Can Do Hard Things. And for her, the hard thing was abandoning her marriage and marrying a woman and dragging her children through that whole ordeal. And really, the premise of her platform is to instruct other adults to do the same thing. And she really lives on the premise of, if I'm happy, the kids are happy, kind of like what you said. You wouldn't want your mother to abandon herself. But I heard you say in an interview, and I've read in your book, that you're saying adults should do the hard things so that kids don't have to do the hard things. And that's such an interesting opposite to her message and the message of the world. So I guess I'm curious, from your experience, we don't know the Doyle children. We don't know how they're feeling. But from what you've seen, how does this story end? Children who are in that situation, who are drugged through the muck of their parents' choices. What's the truth of how hard this really is? What's the reality of that?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the thing, is like, I don't actually know a lot about Glennon Doyle. I've heard her name. Honestly, haven't looked into it as much as I should, but girl totally stole my phrase. We've been saying that for a long time.
Don't look into her before bed. It'll probably keep you up with anger. Daytime.
Yeah. So that's the thing, is like, we have all of these different, in every marriage and family issue. And I'll talk now a little bit more as a pastor's wife. In all of these different marriage and family issues, it's hard. If you're in the middle of a struggling marriage, like we have walked with people in hard, struggling places in their marriage. And this is nothing to be casual about. This is some of the hardest things that adults go through.
Yeah.
Finding out that somebody has a porn addiction, or has developed an emotional affair, or is dealing with fallout from childhood trauma, and it's absolutely crippling them in their relationship, in their marriage. Secret gambling habits. I mean, like, the things that you go through in a marriage are hard, probably some of the hardest things that you're going to do. But the easy thing for adults is to leave. It's an escape. It means you don't have to deal with it anymore, right? But that just means the kids have to do the hard thing, right? Either you're going to do the hard thing and work on your marriage, and it's hard, and I'm not going to pretend like it's not, it is. Or your kids will do the hard thing of having split lives, split homes, split hearts, then having what is, let's be honest, a revolving door, or oftentimes a cycle of different romantic interests coming through your home. They are going to get 50% of mom and 50% of dad, which is half as much as they need. If they are lucky, they're not going to lose usually their father completely. They're going to deal with the instability that goes with the back and forth. And what stuns me is adults who think that they had too much conflict, they needed to split up. You still have the same conflict. The kids are just now your go-between. So in that situation, someone will do the hard thing. It will either be the adults or it will be the kids. And we are here to say it should be the adults. In the situation like Glennon Doyle, let's say, I don't know her story, but let's just say that she's had persistent same-sex attraction and has fought against that, throughout a lot of her adult life. But she was in a marriage, and she was married to a man, and she has a couple kids. Either she is going to do the hard thing of directing her relationship, her romantic and her sexual desire towards her husband, or she is going to force her children to do the hard thing of losing their daily relationship with their father, and the instability that goes with a split home. And also there's physical, mental, emotional, and relational fallout for kids of divorce, regardless of what kind of relationship the parents get into next. So you are choosing a life of loss for your child because you're elevating your own sexual desires as a result. So either Glennon Doyle does the hard thing and channels her energy towards her husband, or her children do the hard thing, and she chose to have her children do the hard thing. And she can say, oh, they love it, because most parents of divorce say, oh, my kids are fine. They're totally fine, right? Then those kids come to me when they're in their 20s or their 30s, and they share their stories anonymously on my website because they still can't tell their parents the truth, because they're still trying to keep them both happy on 2 different Christmases. Yeah. So, in the situation where We talk a lot about sperm and egg donation and surrogacy because that is the commercial separation of children from their mother or father at the moment of birth. Those kids are not doing well. Okay. Those kids are not doing well. Now that we've started to have a few more news stories and books coming out about kids who suddenly discovered that they have 30 half siblings and that their father who raised them is not their father. But these kids struggle with identity issues, feelings of being commodified, longing to know or being afraid to know about their dozens of half siblings, fear of rejection if they do reach out to their biological father or biological mother just to get some accurate medical history. So in situations where you've got a couple that's dealing with infertility, for example, if you want to talk about struggles for women, that's probably at the top.
Yeah.
Women who struggle with infertility. I was reading in Genesis, Rachel, who's watching Leah have baby after baby after baby after baby, goes to Jacob and says, "Give me children or I will die."
Yeah.
And that's how women who have infertility feel. Like, I will die if I don't have this.
Yeah.
So a lot of those couples may choose to use a sperm donor or an egg donor, for example. But what they're saying is, I don't want to do the hard thing of dealing with my infertility in a way that will not force loss on you. So I'm going to force you to deal with the struggle of missing a biological parent, right? Someone's going to do the hard thing in that situation. Is it going to be the adults who navigate their infertility, or is it going to be the children who will then navigate the parental loss, genealogical bewilderment, identity crisis, and missing parent, right? Someone's going to do the hard thing. So in all of these marriage and family issues, either the adult will do the hard thing or they will force the kids to do the hard thing. It's one or the other.
That's such a fantastic summary. They're hard truths to grapple with because they're deeply connected to, I think, some of, like you said, the most profound longings a human can have. I'm so desperate for your perspective of a word of hope for people that find themselves in this situation, either as someone that has gone through surrogacy or who has gone through IVF or was raised by adopted parents. What's the Christian worldview of a God who is a redeemer? What's your word of hope to, okay, this happened and this is just the reality scientifically what has happened. But
Yeah.
God, what's the but God message in it?
Well, and let's just, before we get to but God, let's just talk quickly about adoption because,
Yeah.
I start talking about the importance of biology and everyone's like, oh, you're against adoption. No, absolutely not. My youngest child is adopted. I worked at the largest Chinese adoption agency in the world before I had kids. There is a big difference between adoption and reproductive technologies. And that difference is adults do the hard things. Okay. When you are a parent that is adopting, you are choosing to do hard things for a child that has lost their parents. When you are talking about sperm donation, egg donation, and surrogacy, you are forcing the child to do hard things for you. It is actually the exact opposite. So adoption is a child-centric institution that sees the child as the client. The goal is to find them parents. Reproductive technologies see adults as the client. And the goal is to get the couple a baby, the exact baby that they want, regardless of the cost to that child or any other children. So in the pantheon of them before us, adoption 100% fits into this world of adults doing hard things for kids in need. Okay. So, but I will say, I don't pretend like I can fully compensate for everything my son has lost, right? There is there's questions that he has. There is a biological identity that I can't offer him. And I don't know if we're ever going to be able to find, I don't know, maybe we'll be able to find his parents someday so that he can have some resolution. But what is the wrap up? The wrap up is, or the but God is, first of all, if you've gone through this, right? If you are a child of divorce, or if you're a child in any of these situations, or even if you're an adult in some of these situations and you've experienced pain or you've experienced loss, I will say this. A lot of the times you feel like this is the thing that could have destroyed you. In fact, Satan probably tried to destroy you through it. I think about that in my life, all of the things that I'm the most ashamed of that I thought was my greatest weakness that almost buried me, the things that almost like you don't even want to talk about because you're so burdened by them.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but this is what's been true for me, is that I take those failings, those losses, those sadnesses, even those grave mistakes or whatever it is, and I hand them to Christ, right? And he takes them and he says, "Thank you so much." And he takes them away, but then he gives it back. And he hands it back to me in the form of a weapon that the darkness can't overcome. And so I just find that that is the case. Like all of these sadnesses and losses and hurts in God's hand will never go to waste. And he will do things through you because of the pain, in spite of the pain, that Satan will just claw his eyes out over because he cannot overcome it. So whatever it is that you're struggling with, in God's hands, you can change the world with that business.
Well, yeah.
I see Esther tearing up. I'm tearing up.
Yeah. Because you have no idea. That's an incredibly, it's true. It's just very timely, I feel, to me. I'm very thankful for that word particularly. There's so many things we want to ask you, Katy. I'm so sorry to pivot this, but I'm just so desperate to find out what you think about this issue as well. In terms of, we're seeing this enormous tendency ever increase towards transgenderism. I'm so curious when you have, I just want to know what you think. When you have two people that are same sex in relationship raising kids, and deeply within us, we're looking for that balance that you described, the mom hunger, the dad hunger. First of all, when this occurs, do you think that there is any relationship between the need for gender roles to be fulfilled and the tendency towards transgenderism, that we're sort of saying you can elevate the either female or male and in that void? I wonder if you feel that there's any kind of relationship there.
Well, I do think, and I won't say I think, but like I run groups for kids who have same-sex parents, right? Like kind of secret group chats so they can just talk freely among each other. Because I'll tell you what, if there is one group that is in the closet, it is kids with same-sex parents. Like they usually can't talk to their parents. They would be totally shamed in public. They would be accused of hating the people they love the most. So anyway, so I thank God get a chance to like hear from them and talk with them and all of that. And interestingly, very often same-sex couples do fall into a more masculine and feminine role, right? Yeah. Even, listening to Dave Rubin talk about his plan to create these two custom ordered babies, because that's what they are, with his husband, Dave. And he talks about how, he's more masculine, but his husband, Dave, is much more feminine and nurturing. And he's been reading all of the books about oxytocin and skin to skin contact. And he's not going to be a mother, but he's going to do everything he can to fulfill that maternal role. And that's kind of how it goes. Like, even when there's two women or two men, very often one falls into the more masculine and the more feminine role, right? And I will say that it's interesting because people will say, well, can't you just have a mother, that a woman who fixes cars and is more rough and tumble? And I'm like, yeah, you can. I mean, I'm a little more physical with my kids, like especially my boys. They walk down the hall and I just like check them, right? Like I'm the one that does. So it's not like we all fit these gender stereotypes perfectly. Yeah. But I will say that I've never had a kid in one of those group chats say, yeah, my butch mom totally met my need for a dad. Right? They didn't. They're like, I actually wanted a dad. I don't just want a mom with a short haircut. I want a father. I want my father. I want to know who that is. Yeah. And in terms of the connection with transgenderism, I will tell you this, that if gender does not matter in marriage, gender doesn't matter anywhere. The place where it matters most is marriage. The place where it matters most is the family. I think it matters in places like Congress, the Supreme Court. I think having male and female teachers in schools is important, but the place where it matters most is in the home. And so if that doesn't matter in the home, then gender really, really is anything you want it to be. So I do think that there's a connection with the redefinition of family and now this massive push for transgenderism. And also, obviously, that's just the next stop on the sexual expressionism train, right? If sexual expressionism is God, then this has to be worshiped and everything needs to be sacrificed to it, including children.
So does the data show, so you talk a lot we talk a lot about our faith on this show, but from your perspective, there's data and there's science about same-sex relationships and the reality that biology matters. So what is the methodology of the data? What does the comparison really show? Like, what are those results from just like a study perspective?
Yeah, that's good. There's so much confusion about this. We actually devoted half of a chapter to just kind of taking the data apart as it relates to same-sex parenting. There was such a political push leading up to the decision on gay marriage that I'm sure if you Google same-sex parenting, you'll see something like 79 studies say that children with two moms or two dads fare no different. And that's what they say all the time, no different, or sometimes even better, right, than kids who are raised by their mother and father. So one thing that I like to do, a little thought experiment, is I'll say, okay, look, whenever sociologists are studying parenting that is not same-sex parenting, anytime they're studying family structure, marriage, all of that, not same-sex parent, anything else, they overwhelmingly agree on a few things. Number one, biological parents are one of the key factors to child flourishing, that biological parents invest more money and time, are more strongly connected and more long-term connected, more protective of their kids. Hands down, everybody agrees. And then they also agree that men and women are different, that mothers are different from dads in all of the ways that we talked about, so much so that a lot of sociologists would say there's no such thing as parenting. There's mothering and there's fathering. Moms don't mother, men don't father, kids need both. And then they also agree that anytime a child loses a parent to death, divorce, abandonment, and now through third-party reproduction, that those kids don't fare as well. Okay, so when you're not talking about same-sex parenting, sociologists agree on those three things. So then I think it's so fascinating that when they do start studying same-sex parenting, suddenly a biological parent is always missing. You're always missing the mothering or fathering that maximizes child development. And children have always suffered the trauma of parental loss, whether it's through death, divorce, abandonment, or reproductive technologies. So how is it that those kids are magically faring no different or even better? And the answer is because the methods they used in those quote unquote studies are flawed. They're not studying random participants. They're not using large sample groups. They don't have adequate controls. It's not longitudinal where they're studying the same group over time. Very often, they're not even measuring the experiences of the kids themselves. They're really just surveying the parents of a 8-year-old going, hey, does your kid like having two moms? And they're like, heck yes, he does, right? Check. Doing fair is no different. So once you actually look at studies that have a rigorous methodology, what you see is there's a drastic difference. As you would expect, right? When kids don't have their mom or don't have their dad or don't have that complementarity or whose parent died or they went through a divorce or they were created through sperm and egg donation. And by the way, even kids created through heterosexuals that are, created through sperm and egg donation are not doing as well. So how is it that you then remove the mother or father and they're doing no different? So it's just politicking, unfortunately. But the good news is biology and common sense and good research is going to debunk that pretty quick.
So I'm curious, since you're on the ground floor of this, are we making progress? Do you see hope in policy shifting and culture shifting on this? Because from our perspective, it feels pretty hopeless. So what are you seeing?
Yeah, well, the hope is you can't bury natural law.
Come
right?
on.
When something is written into the natural fabric of the world, you can suppress it, but you can't bury it. It's going to come back. And so right now, we have a lot of confusion technologically, legally, and culturally. But the reality that men and women make babies, that babies need that man and woman, and that the only way that the child is going to get both is when the man and woman are united for life. Okay, that truth will not remain hidden. That is going to resurface, whether it has the full force of our the courts behind it, whether it's going to be widely acknowledged throughout all of culture. I don't know, but somebody who needs answers at some point is going to say, "Hey, in this city in small town Oregon, we've got massive youth homelessness and child poverty and teen suicide and kids falling out, but we notice that the kids who are raised by their married mom and dad don't have any of those problems. So, what if we just massively incentivized men to commit to women before they made the babies and then continued to really encourage them right through social rewards and economic rewards to stay together all their life? What if we did that? right? The natural law of who kids are and what they need is not something that laws can erase or cultural lies can erase. At some point, Glennon Doyle's or Dave Rubin's kids are going to say, I desperately needed a mother. And I actually have, like, in the case of Dave Rubin's kids, I fell asleep every night fantasizing, like, do I know her? Have I passed her on the street? I wonder if she looks like me, because that's what most motherless kids think. So, like, these are not truths that you can legislate away, right? These are things that is just a part of being a human child. And whether our culture recognizes or not, it's not going to, we can't erase it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I personally feel very encouraged, I think, actually, about what's going on. I think even just the recent Roe v. Wade thing, to me, I feel like we are seeing God take massive ground right now. And the more exposure we can have about this kind of issue in particular, and like you said, encouraging people to stand in the gap and to hold your ground and to know why we stand on the Bible with all authority, we will see, I think, great policy change, which I feel encouraged by generally.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Roe versus Wade is the right example here, because that we thought we could legislate away the reality that that's a living baby. And with persistence and 50 years of grit, right, that natural truth emerged again with the help of things like ultrasounds and babies who survived abortions and women who talked about how it affected them.
Yes.
I mean, so like, natural law and reality is on our side. It's a matter of amplifying that reality. And I will also say sharing it in ways that are compelling. I mean, the whole God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. It doesn't work. It's not the mic drop you think it is. You have to really get to the place where you are making a compelling defense, right? And that is what the pro-life world did so well for so long.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's kind of the next question I wanted to ask you. And we're about to wrap up here, but I know a lot of our listeners who are Christians, they're engaging all the time with people who are unbelievers. They want to be able to speak strongly about this when it comes up. Like you said earlier, don't lead with it, but when it comes up, be ready to give your answer. What would you recommend to those listeners? What's a good way to arm ourselves with information? Obviously, your book would be a huge resource. What else would you recommend?
Yeah. Well, the book is there exactly for this. We have a chapter on every single topic. And really each chapter should have been a book, could have been a book. But we tried to tailor it and just capture the highest level social science. And what you're going to get in the book that I think is better than answers is you're going to get stories. And I mean, like, we've always had great research and we've always had the best data because we have the natural world on our side, but we've never had the stories. And it's the stories that, that changed me from being like, well, I'll say something maybe, to get behind me, Satan.
Yeah.
Like, it's the stories of kids are being hurt that moves me to action. So I do think that every one of you guys that are listening to this, like, I'm sure that all of you are pro-life, which thank God, or most of you are, I hope, because it's so foundational. It's so fundamental. So think of it this way. Think about anti-abortion work as children's rights 1.0, right? You are defending the primary child right. But now think about marriage and family and all of these other questions, same-sex parenting, reproductive technologies, transgender parenting, surrogacy, who is adoption for, right? All of these, what is the definition of marriage? All of these are children's rights 2.0, right? It is time to also create a child-centric defense, right, for marriage and family, because all of these issues are matters of justice when it comes to children. So I do think if you want to win hearts, change minds, or at least stand firm, even if they walk away, you have to be an expert. You just have to be an expert. You have to know more about this than they do. You have to be armed with the studies. You have to have the right responses. You have to know the stories of the kids that are actually affected. So that's my recommendation. I need to start a podcast so that I could recommend a podcast. And that's going to happen in the next couple months.
I wish that you would. That would be great.
Yes, please do. Yes.
Well, if only I liked to talk.
Yes. You know what's so funny, Katy? I was actually just going to ask you, could you give us a little tag summary? We love to ask on the podcast when we close out, saying, why does this subject matter? But you've done such a wonderful job doing that. Unless you want to take a stab at it again, why does this matter, particularly defending God's design for family and the rights of children?
Okay, well, I will wrap up with this since you've got a biblical audience. So I actually don't talk a whole lot from the biblical perspective when I do this. There's not any scripture in my book. It's a book based on God's world, not necessarily based on God's word. And of course, because they have the same author, they perfectly complement one another. But I will say this, I have very strong words for Christians that get this wrong. I understand why the unbelieving world is confused. I don't have any patience, especially for church leaders, that compromise or shrink back when it comes to God's design for sex and marriage. If you step away from that design, whether it's shacking up before marriage, whether it's casually leaving your marriage, whether it is a same-sex marriage, whether it is not uniting yourself wholly with your husband or wife, whether it is adultery, really what you're saying is, hey kids, you do the hard work so I don't have to. And that is unacceptable for Christians. Absolutely not. All through the Old Testament, there are 4 demographics that God has outlined for special protection. It is the alien, the poor, the widow, and the fatherless. God hammers over and over that these groups are especially vulnerable, and so you must protect them.
Yes.
Christians, you have a mandate to protect the fatherless. And I will tell you very simply that if you compromise on God's design for sex and marriage, what you are saying is, not only am I not going to protect the fatherless, I am going to incentivize and manufacture fatherless kids. That is millstone around your neck territory, people. Do you understand? You cannot compromise on sex and marriage because you will make child victims, and that is the apple of God's eye. Don't touch them.
I could explode. Thank you. Thank you so much.
We'll leave it at that.
You need
Katy,
to start a podcast.
Yeah, you need to start a podcast. Katy, where can our listeners find more from you? Where can they find you? Where are you?
Yes.
I'm really very, very serious on Twitter. Serious in the sense, like, I need to be more lighthearted. But anyway, I feel like nobody needs to hear about like what I'm baking. But anyway,
no, we need more intensity. You don't need to be lighthearted. Be you. Yes, be you.
So I'm on Twitter at @advo_Katy. And then I've got an official Instagram that Jen runs. I love you, Jen. Because I don't get Twitter. I just think it's the most counterintuitive app I've ever seen in my life.
It's okay.
I'm not on it. Facebook. I agree. Yeah.
For all of you guys that are 40 and older, we're on Facebook too. So yeah, we're on all the social media. Come to our website, subscribe so that you can stay up to date. We're going to have like massive explosion next year. We're going to go nuts next year. So just subscribe and stay on top of it all.
Katy, thank you so much for joining us. Listeners, go buy Katy's book, Them Before Us, and we'll talk to you next time.